HMS Marlborough was an Iron Duke-class battleship of the British Royal Navy, named in honour of John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough. She was built at Devonport Royal Dockyard between January 1912 and June 1914, entering service just before the outbreak of the First World War. She was armed with a main battery of 10 13.5-inch guns and was capable of a top speed of 21.25 knots. Marlborough served with the Grand Fleet for the duration of the war, primarily patrolling the northern end of the North Sea to enforce the blockade of Germany. She saw action at the Battle of Jutland, where she administered the coup de grace to the badly damaged German cruiser HMS Wiesbaden. During the engagement, Wiesbaden hit Marlborough with a torpedo that eventually forced her withdrawal. The damage to Marlborough was repaired by early August, though the last 2 years of the war were uneventful, as the British and German fleets adopted more cautious strategies due to the threat of underwater weapons. After the war, Marlborough was assigned to the Mediterranean Fleet, where she took part in the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War in the Black Sea in 1919–20. She was also involved in the Greco-Turkish War. In 1930, the London Naval Treaty mandated that the 4 Iron Duke-class battleships be discarded. Marlborough was used for a variety of weapons tests in 1931–32, the results of which were incorporated into the reconstruction program for the Queen Elizabeth-class battleships. Design. Marlborough was 622 feet 9 inches long overall and had a beam of 90 feet and an average draft of 29 feet 6 in. She displaced 25,000 long tons as designed and up to 29,560 long tons at combat loading. Her propulsion system consisted of 4 Parsons steam turbines, with steam provided by 18 Babcock and Amp Wilcox boilers. The engines were rated at 29,000 shaft horsepower and produced a top speed of 21.25 knots. Marlborough's cruising radius was 7,800 nautical miles at a more economical 10 knots. She had a crew of 995 officers and enlisted men. During wartime this increased to up to 1,022. The ship was armed with a main battery of 10 BL 13.5-inch HMKV naval guns mounted in 5 twin-gun turrets. They were arranged in 2 super-firing pairs, one forward and one aft. The 5th turret was located amidships, between the funnels and the rear superstructure. Close-range defense against torpedo boats was provided by a secondary armament of 12 BL 6-inch Mk7 guns. Marlborough was also fitted with a pair of QF 3-inch 20 hundredweight anti-aircraft guns and 4 47mm 3-pounder guns. As was typical for capital ships of the period, she was equipped with 421-in torpedo tubes submerged on the broadside. She was protected by a main armored belt that was 12 in thick over the ship's vitals. Her deck was 2.5 in thick. The main battery turret faces were 11 in thick, and the turrets were supported by barbettes 10 in thick. Service history. Marlborough was laid down at Devonport Royal Dockyard on the 25th of January 1912. She was launched nearly 10 months later, on the 24th of October, and was commissioned on the 2nd of June 1914. The ship was completed on the 16th of June 1914, a month before the First World War broke out on the continent. Marlborough initially joined the Home Fleets, where she served as the flagship for Sir Louis Bailey. Following the British entry into the war in August, the Home Fleet was reorganized as the Grand Fleet, commanded by Admiral John Jellicoe. Marlborough was assigned as the flagship of the 1st Battle Squadron, where she served for the duration of the conflict. First World War. On the evening of the 22nd of November 1914, the Grand Fleet conducted a fruitless sweep in the southern half of the North Sea to support Vice Admiral David Beatty's first battle cruiser, Squadron. The fleet was back in port in Scapa Flow by the 27th of November. Marlborough and most of the fleet initially remained in port during the German raid on Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby on the 16th of December 1914, though the 3rd Battle Squadron was sent to reinforce the British forces in the area. After receiving further information about the possibility of the rest of the German fleet being at sea, Jellicoe gave the order for the fleet sortie to try to intercept the Germans, though by that time they had already retreated. Vice Admiral Cecil Burney replaced Bailey aboard Marlborough in December. At the time, Marlborough became the second-in-command flagship for the Grand Fleet. On the 25th of December, the fleet sortied for a sweep in the North Sea, which concluded on the 27th of December without event. Marlborough and the rest of the fleet conducted gunnery drills during 10 to 13 January 1915 west of the Orkneys and Shetlands. On the evening of the 23rd of January, the bulk of the Grand Fleet sailed in support of Beatty's battle cruiser fleet, but the rest of the fleet did not become engaged in the ensuing Battle of Dogger Bank the following day. On 7 to 10 March 1915, the Grand Fleet conducted a sweep in the northern North Sea, during which it undertook training maneuvers. Another such cruise took place during 16 to 19 March. On the 11th of April, the Grand Fleet conducted a patrol in the central North Sea in return to port on the 14th of April. Another patrol in the area took place during 17 to 19 April, followed by gunnery drills off the Shetlands on 20-21 April. The Grand Fleet conducted a sweep into the central North Sea during 17 to 19 May without encountering German vessels. Another patrol followed during 29 to 31 May. It too was uneventful. The fleet conducted gunnery training in mid-June. During 2 to 5 September, the fleet went on another cruise in the northern end of the North Sea and conducted gunnery drills. Throughout the rest of the month, the Grand Fleet conducted numerous training exercises. On the 13th of October, the majority of the fleet conducted a sweep into the North Sea, returning to port on the 15th of October. During 2 to 5 November, Marlborough participated in a fleet training operation west of the Orkneys. Another such cruise took place during 1 to 4 December. The typical routine of gunnery drills and squadron exercises occurred in January 1916. The fleet departed for a cruise in the North Sea on 26 February. Jellicoe had intended to use the Harwich force to sweep the Heligoland Bight, but bad weather prevented operations in the southern North Sea. As a result, the operation was confined to the northern end of the sea. On the night of the 25th of March, Iron Duke and the rest of the fleet sailed from Scapa Flow to support the battle cruiser fleet and other light forces that raided the German Zeppelin base at Tondern. On the 21st of April, the Grand Fleet conducted a demonstration off Horns Reef to distract the Germans, while the Russian Navy relayed its defensive minefields in the Baltic Sea. The fleet returned to Scapa Flow on the 24th of April and refueled, before proceeding south in response to intelligence reports that the Germans were about to launch a raid on Lowestoft. The Grand Fleet did not arrive in the area until after the Germans had withdrawn. During 2 to 4 May, the fleet conducted another demonstration off Horns Reef to keep German attention focused on the North Sea. Battle of Jutland. In an attempt to lure out and destroy a portion of the Grand Fleet, the German High Seas Fleet with 16 dreadnoughts, 6 Spree dreadnoughts, 6 light cruisers and 31 torpedo boats commanded by Vice Admiral Reinhard Scheer, departed the Jade early on the morning of the 31st of May. The fleet sailed in concert with Rear Admiral Franz von Hipper's 5 battle cruisers and supporting cruisers and torpedo boats. The Royal Navy's Room 40 had intercepted and decrypted German radio traffic containing plans of the operation. The Admiralty ordered the Grand Fleet of 28 dreadnoughts and 9 battle cruisers to sortie the night before to cut off and destroy the High Seas Fleet. On the day of the battle, Marlborough was stationed toward the rear of the British line in the 6th Division of the 1st Battle Squadron. The initial action was fought primarily by the British and German battle cruiser formations in the afternoon, but by 1800, the Grand Fleet approached the scene. 15 minutes later, Jellicoe gave the order to turn and deploy the fleet for action. The transition from the cruising formation caused congestion with the rear divisions, forcing Marlborough and many of the other ships to reduce speed to 8 knots to avoid colliding with each other. The British ships initially had poor visibility and Marlborough could only faintly make out a group of German Kaiser-class battleships at 1817. In the span of 4 minutes, she fired 7 salvos, first at 10,000 yards and then at 13,000 yards. Marlborough's gunners claimed to have made hits with the 5th and 7th salvos, but these claims are unlikely. Her guns were then masked by a burning cruiser, probably the armored cruiser HMS Warrior. Marlborough joined the group of battleships battering the German light cruiser HMS Wiesbaden at 1825. She fired 5 salvos, before a premature detonation in the right barrel of a turret disabled the gun. She also engaged the ship with her secondary battery. At 1839, Marlborough again engaged what appeared to be a Kaiser-class ship, firing a salvo before the German vessel disappeared into the haze. During the engagement with Wiesbaden, the German cruiser launched 1 or 2 torpedoes at around 1845, one of which struck Marlborough around the starboard diesel generator room. The detonation tore a 28-foot hole in the hull and causing significant flooding that forced the forward boilers on that side of the ship to be extinguished and reduced the ship's speed to 16 knots. Burney initially reported to Jellicoe that his ship had struck a mine or had been hit by a torpedo at 1857. Several more torpedoes, this time from the torpedo boat SMS V-48, forced Marlborough and the rest of the ships in her division to take evasive action. At 1903, Marlborough engaged Wiesbaden again, firing 4 salvos at ranges of 9,500 to 9,800 yards. She hit the German cruiser with probably 3 shells from the last 2 salvos, and these finally neutralized the ship. Although it took several more hours before Wiesbaden sank, Marlborough then shifted fire to the König-class battleships leading the German line at 1912. She fired 13 salvos in the span of 6 minutes, at SMS Großer Kurfürst at ranges of 10,200 to 10,750 yards, scoring 3 hits, though she incorrectly claimed a 4th hit. During this phase of the battle, Marlborough fired 2 torpedoes, both of which missed the targets, the first at Wiesbaden at 1910 and the second at SMS Kaiser at 1925. By about 1930, Marlborough's pumps had contained the flooding in the boiler rooms, but she took on a list of around 7 to 8 degrees. Instead of using counter-flooding to minimize the list, her crew attempted to correct the list by using coal and oil from the starboard bunkers first. The list caused the generators supplying power to the main battery turrets to flood, hampering the gun crews, particularly as shells were transferred from the magazines to the turrets. The blast from the torpedo was so powerful that 40 watertight compartments were damaged, though the torpedo bulkhead localized most of the damage and the more badly damaged compartments were sufficiently shored up. 3 more torpedoes approached Marlborough at 1933. She evaded the first 2 and the third harmlessly passed under the ship. After the opposing fleets disengaged late in the day, the Grand Fleet steamed south in an attempt to cut off the retreating Germans and destroy them the following morning. The 6th Division was slowed down by Marlborough, which could make no more than 15.75 knots by this point. By around 2 o'clock on the 1st of June, the 6th Division was about 12 nmi behind the rest of the fleet. At the time, the bulkheads in the starboard forward boiler room started to give way under the strain, forcing Marlborough to reduce speed to 12 knots. The damage control teams believed that if the main battery were to fire, the shoring supporting the damaged bulkheads would give way, greatly increasing the risk to the ship. Jellicoe detached the ship to proceed independently to Rosyth at the time. Burney had ordered the scout cruiser Fearless to come alongside to transfer him to the battleship Revenge. Marlborough thereafter proceeded northward at a speed of 11 knots. Fearless rejoined Marlborough around 4 o'clock and both ships briefly fired at the German Zeppelin L-11. Commodore Reginald Tirrett's Harwich Force had been ordered to reinforce the Grand Fleet, particularly to relieve ships low on fuel. They departed at 3:50, but this was too late for them to reach the fleet by morning. Sir Jellicoe ordered Tirrett to detach destroyers to escort Marlborough back to port. On the way, Marlborough and Fearless encountered the British submarines G3 and G5. The 2 submarines prepared to attack the ships but fortunately recognized them before they launched torpedoes. By 1500, 8 destroyers from the Harwich Force had joined Marlborough and another pump had been lowered into the flooded boiler room. At around 23:30, the pump was being moved to clean it when the roll of the ship threw the pump into the damaged bulkhead, knocking the shores loose. Water flooded into the ship and Marlborough's captain ordered Fearless and the destroyers to prepare to come alongside to rescue the crew if the flooding worsened. At 0:47 on the 2nd of June, a diver was sent into the boiler room at the time, and he was able to keep the pump clean, which slowly reduced the water level in the ship. Jellicoe ordered Marlborough to proceed to the Humber for temporary repairs. While there, her forward main battery and 6-inch magazines were emptied to lighten the ship. More pumps were brought aboard and the shoring supporting the damaged bulkhead was reinforced. On the morning of the 6th of June, the ship left the Humber for the Tyne, where she would receive permanent repairs, escorted by 4 destroyers from the Harwich Force. In the course of the battle, Marlborough had fired 162 shells from her main battery, 60 rounds from her secondary guns and 5 torpedoes. The torpedo hit had killed 2 men and wounded another 2. She was repaired by the Armstrong-Whitworth shipyard at Jarrow, with the work lasting until the 2nd of August, after which she departed for Cromarty, arriving on the 5th of August. During the repair work, an extra 100 t of armor plating was added to the ship, primarily over the magazines. These alterations were the result of the British experience at Jutland, where 3 battle cruisers had been destroyed by magazine explosions. Later operations. On the 18th of August, the Germans again sortied, this time to bombard Sunderland. Scheer hoped to draw out Beatty's battle cruisers and destroy them. British signals intelligence decrypted German wireless transmissions, allowing Jellicoe enough time to deploy the Grand Fleet in an attempt to engage in a decisive battle. Both sides withdrew the following day after their opponents' submarines inflicted losses in the action of the 19th of August. The British cruisers Nottingham and Falmouth were both torpedoed and sunk by German U-boats, and the German battle battleship HMS Westphalen was damaged by the British submarine E-23. After returning to port, Jellicoe issued an order that prohibited risking the fleet in the southern half of the North Sea due to the overwhelming risk from mines and U-boats. In February 1917, Revenge replaced Marlborough as the first battle squadron flagship. She thereafter served as the second command flagship. She was briefly replaced in this role by Emperor of India in May, and she temporarily became a private ship. Toward the end of the year, the Germans began using destroyers and light cruisers to raid the British convoys to Norway. This forced the British to deploy capital ships to protect the convoys. On the 23rd of April 1918, the German fleet sortied in an attempt to catch one of the isolated British squadrons. Though the convoy had already passed safely, the Grand Fleet sortied too late the following day to catch the retreating Germans. Though the battlecruiser HMS Marlborough was torpedoed and badly damaged by the submarine HMS E-42. In 1918, Marlborough and her sisters received flying-off platforms on their B and Q turrets to handle reconnaissance aircraft. Following the capitulation of Germany in November 1918, the Allies interned most of the High Seas Fleet in Scapa Flow. The fleet rendezvoused with the British light cruiser Cardiff, which led the ships to the Allied fleet that was to escort the Germans to Scapa Flow. The massive fleet consisted of some 370 British, American, and French warships. The fleet remained in captivity during the negotiations that ultimately produced the Treaty of Versailles. Reuter believed that the British intended to seize the German ships on the 21st of June 1919, which was the deadline for Germany to have signed the peace treaty. That morning, the Grand Fleet left Scapa Flow to conduct training maneuvers, and while they were away, Reuter issued the order to scuttle the High Seas Fleet. Post-war career. On the 12th of March 1919, Marlborough was recommissioned at Devonport and assigned to the Mediterranean Fleet as part of the 4th Battle Squadron, along with her 3 sisters and 2 Centurion-class battleships. During this period, she served in the Black Sea during the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War to support the Whites against the Red Bolsheviks. On the 5th of April 1919, Marlborough arrived in Sevastopol before proceeding to Yalta the following day. The ship took Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna and other members of the Russian imperial family, including Grand Duke Nicholas and Prince Felix Yusupov, aboard in Yalta on the evening of the 7th. The Empress refused to leave unless the British also evacuated wounded and sick soldiers, along with any civilians that also wanted to escape the advancing Bolsheviks. The Russian entourage aboard Marlborough numbered some 80 people, including 44 members of the royal family and nobility, with a number of governesses, nurses, maids and manservants, plus several hundred cases of luggage. About 35 officers' cabins were vacated and additional bunks were installed, with the Empress taking over the captain's cabin. On the morning of the 12th of April, the ship anchored off Halki Island, about 12 miles from Constantinople. Due to some uncertainty over the final destination for the Russian royal family, on the 16th of April, Grand Duke Nicholas Nikolaevich and his wife, the Grand Duchess Anastasia, the Grand Duke Peter Nikolaevich and his wife, her Duchess Milika, Princess Marina, Prince Roman, Count and Countess Tiskiewicz, Baron and Baroness Stahl, Mr. Boldareff and Dr. Malama, with the respective servants, left the ship and boarded HMS Lord Nelson, destined for Genoa. They were replaced by Count Dmitry and Countess Sophia Mengden, Count George and Countess Irina Mengden, Countess Vera Mengden, Count Nicholas Mengden, Madame Helena Urchoff and 2 maids. On the morning of the 18th of April, Good Friday, the ship sailed for Malta. The ship departed on the 18th of April, bound for Malta to deposit the Russians, before returning to Constantinople. In May 1919, Marlborough conducted tests with new high-explosive 6-inch shells off the Kerch Peninsula, though these proved to be unreliable. During this period, she operated a kite balloon to aid in spotting the fall of shot. Later that month, a shell broke up in the left barrel of a turret and caused minor damage. While stationed off the Kerch Peninsula, the ship provided artillery support to White troops, including bombardments of Bolshevik positions in the villages of Koyasan and Alkamichi. By 1920, British attention had turned to the Greco-Turkish War. On the 20th of June 1920, Marlborough arrived in Constantinople, where the Mediterranean fleet was being concentrated to support the occupation of the city. On the 6th of July, British forces landed at Gemlik, while Marlborough provided artillery support. In October 1920, the battleship King George V arrived to replace Marlborough in the Mediterranean fleet. Marlborough then returned to Devonport, where she was paid off for a major refit that took place between February 1921 and January 1922. During the refit, range dials were installed, along with another rangefinder on the rear superstructure. The aircraft platform was removed from B turret. Long base rangefinders were installed on X turret. After completing the refit in January 1922, Marlborough was recommissioned and assigned to the Mediterranean, where she replaced Emperor of India. She served as the second command flagship until October. Following the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, the Allied countries withdrew their occupation forces from Turkey. Marlborough was involved in escorting the troop convoys out of Constantinople. Marlborough briefly served as the flagship for the deputy commander of the 4th Battle Squadron after King George V was damaged from striking a rock off Mytilene. In November 1924, the 4th Battle Squadron was renamed the 3rd Battle Squadron. In March 1926, the 3rd Battle Squadron, including Marlborough, was transferred to the Atlantic Fleet. There, the battleships served as training ships. In 1929, the ship's 3-inch anti-aircraft guns were replaced with more powerful 4-inch guns. In January 1931, Marlborough served as the squadron flagship, relieving Emperor of India. She remained in the position for only 5 months, being decommissioned on the 5th of June. According to the terms of the London Naval Treaty of 1930, the 4 ships of the Iron Duke class were to be scrapped demilitarized. Marlborough was scheduled to be removed from service in 1931 and broken up for scrap. The ship was used as a target to test the effect of various weapons on capital ships, along with Emperor of India. The tests included firing destroyer armament at the upper works at close range to test their effectiveness in a simulated night engagement, direct hits from 13.5-INCH shells, bomb tests, and experiments with flash tightness in the magazines. The first 2 tests were conducted in July 1931, and were simulations of magazine explosions. The venting system worked as designed, and while the explosions caused serious internal damage, Marlborough was not destroyed, as the 3 battle cruisers had been at Jutland. In 1932, further tests were conducted with dummy 250-pound and 500-pound bombs to test deck strength, 450-pound armor-piercing bombs and 1,080-pound high-explosive bombs were then detonated inside the ship to test their effectiveness. The Royal Navy determined that the HE bombs were useless, but that thick deck armor would be required to defeat HAP bombs. This led to the decision to reinforced the deck armor of existing battleships throughout the 1930s. Marlborough was placed on the disposal list in May 1932 and was quickly sold to the Halava Shipbreaking Co. On the 25th of June, she arrived in Rosyth, where she was broken up for scrap.